Good evening. So we at Times Network in planning our products, understand our consumers, study our consumers, the so-called decision-making Indians. And we figured that the Indians, for a long time, post-independence right up to the 90s, were what we call passive optimists. Passive optimists who were people who believe that things are going to be good and they're not going to do much about it, but things will get good by itself. I mean, the action part was a little missing. And then in the 90s, with the balance of payment crisis, IMF conditions, we got pushed out of our socialistic, protectionistic cocoon and got pushed into the world of competition, into the real world of uncertainty. Post that, I think it is desire for a better life which has sort of kept that drive on. And we have come a long way from being passive optimists to something else. But I think somewhere on the way, a lot of us still remain caught between becoming active players. Many of us, I think, are still in the stage of demanding crybabies. It's always about the government, it's always about policy, it's always about waiting for the budget. It's as if, you're waiting for the referee to set the game, forgetting that it's the players, us, who need to sort of go out there and do things to win the match. And that, I think, is what we felt, that when we are looking at setting an agenda for the nation to take us to the next level, besides and beyond policy and government and other people and the leaders and parents who will do something for us, what do we as people, as citizens, need to do? And that's where we felt that we needed to bring somebody who is an expert on uncertainty, probably the world's foremost on risk, Nassim Taleb. Nassim has come everything in a reverse order. He started his life as a trader, did a great job with risk-taking, options trading. At the age of 44, he retired, and then in the meanwhile, he also did a PhD, and he got into more and more into academics. He started writing, and of course, his essays and books are major bestsellers, translated into over 40 languages. And then, from writing general essays, he started going technical and followed it up with 75 plus mathematical technical papers. I was quite surprised to hear that yesterday. And he's basically somebody who's, he's of course a renowned professor, but he refuses to be typecast as an expert or an intellectual who's just giving you advice from theory than from practice. Over to you, sir.
Oh, thank you very much. I'm going to be talking about skin in the game and how a few counterintuitive things, mainly that education sort of distracts you from growth. Formal education, that is, how nothing coming from the state really, in general, works. Maybe in India it does, but I'm going to be talking in general. Maybe it doesn't work, and things like that. So let me start with my background. So I started as a trader, doing that kind of crazy stuff, and then later on became a professor. Okay, so I did it in that sequence. And typically when I do it in the other sequence, you get different results. Sort of like if you wash your shirt, then iron it, you get different results from when if you iron your shirt, then wash it later. Okay, so it's the same, so it's past dependent. So you view the world differently, and you're very skeptical of academia in general. Some things work, some things don't, but you know which one, you know exactly what you want, what you need, what your needs are, and which way you should be heading. So, so I'm going to be talking about why the world is different for us practitioners and what damage can come from the top-down solutions usually brought about by people who don't have what I call skin in the game, and I'll define in a few minutes. So let's first talk about the expert crisis, and I'll explain to you skin in the game in terms of that crisis. A friend of mine, when I retired from trading, as you can see in the slides in the back, to become this, I didn't decide to become a professor to become a professor. I just did it because I was incapable of doing anything else. And my wife wanted me out of the house, all right, so I became professor. So a friend of mine, in the same situation, he was a former partner at Goldman Sachs, same age group, same situation. He decided to lose his money very slowly in the restaurant business in New York. So, and what I learned from him is the following, that there are two ways to judge a restaurant. One of them is your plastic credit card. The other one is awards. And the two are two different things. There are awards in the restaurant business, followed by gala dinner around now in December, when people gain weight, that period. So, and during the year, restaurants are granted prizes. The best tandoori in town, the best tandoori uptown, the best sushi with soft music, the best, French with classical music, all kind of categories. And my friend noticed that very few restaurants made it to the gala dinner. They were often out of business before. So what's happening there? What happened there is that if you're judged by the market, okay, if you're subjected to evolutionary pressures, okay, you have subjected to different dynamics than if you're judged by peers, which is why we have an expert problem that's now emerging. Being judged by peers, anything judged by peers is eventually going to rot. So when we look at the plumber, for example, when you look at the plumber, how are plumbers judged? There's a committee of plumbers that at year-end gives them a bonus by recommendation letters and stuff like that, like academics? No. Who judges plumber? You. So you know very quickly if a plumber is incompetent. Who judges dentists? Same way. If you walk into a dentist office and come out without teeth, you've got problems. Then you realize there's no competence. So some fields have an expert problem, okay, and some fields don't. Because when you judge an economist, you have no idea if what they know is relevant. Because they're not judged by reality. They don't have what I call skin in the game. If they're wrong, they survive. Policymakers in Washington, they can cause a war in Iraq, and if they're wrong, they can kill 100,000 people, yet survive. That doesn't work. It doesn't work that way with plumbers. It doesn't work that way with restaurant owners. It doesn't work that way with you. You have a P&L? Yep. Therefore, you are subjected to evolutionary pressure. You have skin in the game. So what has happened recently is that people suddenly started getting fed up with those without skin in the game. Incidentally, what you see behind is the mind of an economist on a clear day. Because they don't have evolutionary pressure, so they're going to look for complicated stuff. So they put complicated stuff on complicated stuff, and talks and words on top of words, and math and bad math over, and then they go in circles. So it becomes a circular loop of experts judging one another without any survival. There's no P&L. If there's no P&L, it doesn't count. That's what you learn as a trader, you see. But it doesn't mean that all economists are bad. A lot of economists have traded and successfully and stuff like that. But I'm saying that there are fields that are rotten, even although the people in them are not. So now this will bring us to education and some unpleasant consequences. Go ahead.
If they were good traders, I think they wouldn't go and become economists.
That's true. That's true. It's also an economist someone who really is an expert at telling you what didn't happen. So this is sort of like the background that can explain what has happened. It's not that with Brexit, with other things, with what they call the general rebellion against experts, is that people, you know, the people in the UK, they love Europe. But Europe and Brussels are not the same thing. Governments and bureaucrats are not the same thing. So you start having an environment dominated by bureaucrats, you know, you have the failure of these evolutionary pressures. So, sorry, is there a way I can see my slides on this? Technical difficulties. But the, but it's, technical difficulties is always very good for someone who deals with errors and uncertainty. Okay, so the Brexit, yes. So here we're seeing what's happened with Brexit. First of all, these people are boring to start with. Okay, so they don't vote. People don't like to vote for people who are boring. They're not subjected to evolutionary pressures. And what's worse, the slides are disappearing all the time. Yeah, on this, but I want to see the slides. And so we don't see evolutionary pressure, and people have detected it. So let's go back a little bit in history. At no time in history have more people been able to rise to prominence without being risk takers. At no point in history, whether economic or anything. Why? Because governments now represent 50 to 70% of GDP in the Western world. Before, they represented 5 to 10% of GDP. We never had what we have today, is that a whole class of people not accountable, because if they make a mistake, they still survive. But people detect it. In history, you rose when you took more risks than others. Julius Caesar, first in battle. 2/3 of Roman emperors died a violent death, and the remaining 1/3 could have been poisoning. You see? Same thing with economic risk-taking. So this is the background we're facing today, is that we have so many people who don't get it, and these bureaucrats, that the crowd respects risk takers. Just like when you see this picture I took in Jaipur 2 years ago when I was there, the peacock boasts his risk-taking by showing the tail that's a handicap, just to tell you, look, in spite of all of that, I can survive. So this is the environment in which we live today, and let's see how it led to the election of Trump. So I was watching, while I was writing Skin in the Game, so just to explain, Skin in the Game is part of the collection called Inserto, the 5 volumes. And I was writing the last volume, Skin in the Game, watching television with the sound off. They're not showing my slides. Please keep my slides on this. All right. So, and suddenly, it hit me looking at this picture, the debate for the primary, Republican primary. It hit me that Donald Trump was going to win. But I didn't know why. There's something about him that was real. Why was he real? The New York Times had been on a smear campaign publishing that the fellow lost $1 billion of his own money. Now, guess what? To lose $1 billion of your own money, okay, it means you have skin in the game. And if you know soldiers, those wounded in war, what do? They show their scar, okay? Because there's nothing wrong with failure in risk-taking in the eyes of the crowd if it's your own money, okay? For a New York Times person or an intellectual, oh, it's a failure, because intellectuals don't know how to handle failure. They don't understand that life is managing failures. But in the real world, failure is part and parcel of the process, and it made him real. He probably was a bad investor, but he was real compared to the other people who were not. And people detected that. So people are starting to detect there's something wrong in an environment dominated by bureaucrats. So therefore, when you think about it, we have now a lot of virtue signaling. Hey, you know what, save the environment, don't wash the sheets, it's for the hotel to save money, all right? Save the environment, do this, go join an NGO. Say, no, 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 virtue is not there. Virtue is when you take risk for the sake of the collective. Because just as a fallen soldier is not dishonored by the fact that she or he got hurt, okay? An entrepreneur should not be dishonored by the fact that she or he failed. As a matter of fact, if you need something, it's a culture of success and a culture of risk-taking, okay? Don't be afraid of errors. Now we have a lot of small little errors. We survived them, okay? We're gonna be better off. And that's how life goes, okay? When bureaucrats and people coming from the top, they don't get it. Why? Because the education system does not like failure. So they instill in people very bad habits. So that was my first point about skin in the game as a filter. If you don't have that filter, if you don't have the kind of punishment as a filter in society, society cannot function. And even though people may fail, they still should need to consider it as a badge of honor, which is where when people start talking to me about growth and stuff like that, I look at them and say, no, you don't get it. All these macro things are just like background furniture. There's one rule that will tell you whether you're going to grow or not, and we're going to see it, is do you have enough risk-taker tinkering? Because you probe uncertainty not by studies and theories, as we're going to see next. You probe uncertainty by trial and error and tinkering. And let's see how. You have
Yeah, I think, but you know, a system, definitely in India, because you know, I have studied and grown up and made a career in India, and I think in many other parts, that incentivizes children to sort of study a particular type of, get a degree, and then go into a job, and then be part of a bureaucracy, and fill in the slots, tick the things that you're supposed to do, and go home, get a salary. And that's the general structure of most of, at least what we know here in India. And I'm sure that's the way it has been. And I think, how will it sort of incentivize? Because I'm more interested in getting a job.
Exactly. So we're going to now see how, when we talk about the UK, or whatever you want to call it, Great Britain or England, stuff like that, when it was England, how did they pull out of poverty? They didn't pull out of poverty thanks to Whitehall or policy making. They pulled out of poverty thanks to adventures and risk-taking. Okay, and we're going to see how you probe uncertainty.
Yeah, the Whitehall culture is what probably sort of led to the Indian civil services, exactly. And that's the most coveted job today. I mean, people want that, or something like that within the private sector. Even corporate jobs are not about you know, risk-taking jobs. I mean, at least bulk of people want jobs which are to sort of just give them a job.
Exactly, it came after, and you're going to see a very easy statistic. Korea was poor and had low level of education. Then Korea got rich, and then education went up. Switzerland, when it was the richest country in Europe, and probably in the world, had the lowest level of college graduates of Europe.
Now that's okay. Against what we believe.
Okay, but doesn't mean they don't have education. We're going to see the type of education they had, the technique, on which I'm going to next. Let's see how you probe uncertainty, how bad we are to probe uncertainty with intellect. But we're a lot better with our hand by trial and error. You recognize this object behind me? It's not a bagel. It's a wheel. It's about 6,000 years old. Why on earth did it take so long to get this? Okay, to get the wheel implemented on a suitcase. I'm old enough, okay, and I'm my friend Mark Mobius, or my friend, or we've met a few times. You remember, I'm sure, the days when going to your private plane, you had to lift the luggage because there was no such contraption. No? I remember long walks in JFK airport because it was very long, right? Long walks, lifting suitcases because I was too cheap to spend $1 when I was a student on a trolley, okay? So why did it take so long? Okay, so now you would think it's an anecdote. Maybe it's that application that something could stare at us for 6,000 years and the application comes later, right? Because remember, the Sumerians, 2400 BC, had the wheel. And the Egyptians built the pyramids with the wheel. So these people have built the pyramids in Mexico. Practically all of Latin America, or what's now Latin America, was South America and Central America, had no wheel, supposedly. So they were building this corn maze. They overfeed people corn maze, and someone whipping them. That's it. That was, the way they built. They didn't have the wheels to, Did they really not have the wheel? Like us. It was staring at them. This is in the Mexican, the Central Mexican Museum or something like that. Toys was wheel on them. They knew about the wheel, but they could use it for children's toys and never hit them. They could use it, to help build the pyramid. Okay, so we're not good with intellect. Something can be staring at us for a long time. Believe me, it's going to get worse. The next 10 minutes is going to get a lot worse. And then probably it will get better, all right? So let me give you one thing to make it even worse. In practically all my books, I talk about books in finance that are non-charlatanic. Non-charlatanic means, it doesn't tell you how to make money. It tells you how not to lose money. That's what I call via negativa. This is how you can tell a charlatan. A good chess player tells you how not to lose. That's what they do, try not to lose, all right? And a good trader, try not to lose, okay? And that's it. So they don't know how to make money. Anyway, so it's called What I Learned Losing $1 Million, and needless to say, the book went out of print. I lobbied to have it reprinted, okay, and it went out of print again, all right? And I bought a lot of stock. Okay, so the fellow was giving his life story. I was a pit trader, as you can see. You probably can, I had hair at the time, though. But I was a pit, and then there was actually in the same pit I was training. The fellow lost $1 million trading something called green lumber, okay? So he knew everything about green lumber. He had every report on lumber. He knew everything about fabrication of lumber. He knew everything about weather systems. He knew everything about demand, GDP, this, econometric, about everything about green lumber. Yet he lost all his money trading it. In the pit, there was a fellow, and he was famous because he would get divorced every 4 years and lose half his money every time, okay? But he made a lot of money trading green lumber. And his name, I think, was Jerry Siegel or something like that. Famous in the pit of Chicago. One day, the narrator discovered that Jerry Siegel, who made his fortune in lumber, didn't know that green lumber was lumber that was freshly cut. He thought that was painted green. Now, how can you make so much money steadily through the years, in spite of divorces, be the richest person in America? He knew a lot of stuff about green lumber, but not the stuff you think you need to know from the outside. And that's central about skin in the game. In other words, there is a lot of knowledge but there's a lot of knowledge you get from the inside as a practitioner that you will not see from the outside, sitting in a university, writing papers and reading papers and transmitting your knowledge via papers versus knowledge transmitted via survival. Now that will take us into one more dimension. I tell you, it's going to get a little worse. Skin in the game is when you're subjected to evolutionary pressures, okay? So let's say that I'm going to quiz you. You go to a hospital and you need to have, there's a great surgery, brain surgery. You do it, it will enhance your sense of humor. Okay, not that you need it, but let's say that you decide to go do it. You go, you interview doctors in the hospital. It's a very delicate operation in your brain. You have the choice between two doctors. The first doctor, you're in New York, the first doctor looks like a butcher, thick fingers. You walk in his office, you don't see the diploma. When you don't see the diploma of a doctor, it means the fellow went into some undergraduate school you never heard about, okay? Otherwise, I wouldn't put it, okay? And of course, thick fingers, speaks with a thick New York accent from Brooklyn, even worse, New Jersey maybe, all right? Okay, and could have been like out of a soprano, all right? And then, okay, in the same rank in the hospital, there is another person you would hire for Bollywood if you want to represent a doctor. Harvard degrees that they don't hide, like, you know, so on. Harvard alumni thing. You walk in, you know it's Harvard around. Dressed impeccably, silver rimmed glasses, speaks upper class English. And now you have to choose between these two surgeons for your brain operation. Who would you pick? The second one, the doctor who looks like a doctor. That's a problem. On their skin in the game, and you know, the problem, if you ask bureaucrats to pick someone, they pick the second one. But let's think about it. If you don't look the part, you got to be very, very good to survive, okay? Because there is skin in the game in that profession. You see, you have one error as a brain surgeon, guess what? Your history. Maybe not one error, maybe two errors, but you know, at the second or third one, your history. You go become real estate investor or something, all right? So, or you economist, all right? So you realize that under skin in the game, when there's a filter of reality, people don't have to look the part. They got to be real. And as a matter of fact, I will tell you, if someone looks the part, it is suspicious for me. Very suspicious, okay? So when I see a doctor who looks like a butcher, to me, it's comforting to say, in spite of all the prejudice you have to overcome in your life, okay? So there is that skin in the game. And bureaucrats never pick that. Now, let's translate that into projects. A good business plan, if it looks good, guess what? Don't invest in it. You see? It has to be, if something natural, you see, because people who are good at something, they're not good at marketing themselves and packaging and giving you words like that. So this is, and here is the main drawback of bureaucracies, is that there's no feedback from reality, no P&L. You're going to go to the one who looks like a doctor who's going to be the least skilled.
Nassim, but you're basically saying that you know, you don't want kids to go to school beyond a point, to colleges, and you know, get you know, become the role that they need to play. And in a country like India, where we are sort of short of resources, are you saying that college education may not really be the, you know, that whole...
I mean, college education, and we're going to see now, teaches you the bad habits. I know we know very well from lawyers. The big lawyers, those who go to Harvard, they go to government. The big rainmakers in New York, they went to law school you never heard of. Okay. You see, so I'm not saying that education is bad. I'm saying that education is one small component overblown by the educational system and overblown by things. Experience, there's so many elements. And this is, what I'm saying is not particularly new. Hayek said it in a different format. Schumpeter said it in a different format. A lot of people said it in a different format. But the whole idea is, if I observe reality, and what I'm saying is studies from the World Bank showing that level of education in a country does not cause growth in GDP. In Egypt, it caused the reverse, okay? What causes education is GDP. Now, of course, we're gonna now look at which education is important. What made Switzerland, Switzerland? What made the UK, the UK? What makes China, China?
Yeah.
There we go. What makes China, China, all right? What makes these countries grow? Next step is what I call the philosopher's stone, is what turns what? Lead into gold, is exactly the opposite of what Wall Street. You give them gold, they give you lead, all right? Now here is the reverse, okay? So let's talk about the philosopher's stone, okay? And let's see the modes of the two ways we can probe reality and approach things, okay? I was an option trader. So this links to my option trading very simply. If I have an option, I have more upside than downside. I don't have to understand the environment, okay? Because on balance, I'll make money. So for example, when I started investing in gold recently, I wasn't particularly interested in gold. I started looking, someone showed me gold stocks, and some gold stocks were such that if gold rises, their value would go up more than it would go down if gold goes down. So there's asymmetry. There's an asymmetry. You make more if you're right, than you lose if you're wrong. It's called trial and error, is one form of asymmetry. So optionality, I call it optionality. So let's see what businesses, for example, have made a lot of money not knowing what's going on. Pharma. Do you think pharma got rich because they understood the biology so much? Okay, there are 800,000 authorized drugs in history. There are about 100,000 on the market today. Of these, there are less than 200 drugs that are used today for what they're designed for. Okay. What happened is that you have optionality when you develop a drug. We take, let's say, someone just informed me of a drug called Viagra. But, you know, what was it? Was it designed? Did they have a committee, a bureaucrat deciding, oh, what are we going to do next? Enhance the lives of people who go into retirement? No. What happened? It was simply a blood pressure medicine gone wrong. Okay, so you have a side effect of your mistakes, okay? Because your mistakes can either harm you a little or make you a lot of money, okay? So that is a business that knows how to probe uncertainty and effectively take aspirin. It started as a fever reducer. Then someone discovered pain-killing properties. Okay, that's a bonus. And today it's used for neither. So let me now show the philosopher's stone for me is this idea that with trial and error, you can make gold out of an environment you don't understand with the following thought experiment. We hire 2 buses. The first bus goes to universities around Mumbai and rounds up every chemist you can find. You just hijack them. I mean, legally, right? So we bring them here to the hotel, the chemists. The second bus goes around Mumbai outside restaurants, and the minute you see people who are overweight and well-dressed, I think I qualify, right? You hijack them and bring them here. So you have 2 groups of people. People who are overweight and well-dressed but don't understand chemistry, and people who know chemistry inside out, the professors of chemistry. So 50 by 50. We decide, what's your favorite dish? Biryani. Sorry, biryani?
Biryani.
Okay, we take a biryani and we say we're going to now improve on the recipe for biryani. So you give the chemist the recipe, so the chemists go into their equations trying to improve on the recipe for biryani. The other people, what do? They randomly add something. This is uncertainty. If it tastes good, you ratchet up. Okay, I mean, visibly they're good at tasting. They're overweight like me, all right, and they like restaurants, all right. So, and if it doesn't taste better, you have nothing to lose. You give the stuff to the chemists, who they won't know better because they're intellectuals, all right. So, and then who at the end will win the competition of improving on biryani? The chemists or the tinkerers? The tinkerers, the trial and error. Okay, now if we look at history, the Industrial Revolution did not start with Whitehall. It started with tinkerers. Not only it started with tinkerers, but we had the recipe. Just like with the wheel, we had the recipe for the steam engine from Hero of Alexandria, lying down for a couple of thousand years that nobody put 2 and 2 together. You had adventurers, completely uneducated, who did it. Okay. Likewise, pharma, trial and error. No, of course, they dress it up later. So this is what I call lecturing birds how to fly. Education has a lot of good, But a lot of it is lecturing birds how to fly by making you believe that all these results come from education rather than they come from a culture of tinkering, a built-in culture in society for tinkering and trial and error. Okay.
How do you foster that? How do you sort of get to a place? And I think for us in India, the favorite example is next door in China. They were like us, and now they are a lot ahead of us. So what changed there? Okay. One, their education. Two, their top-down system of government. You know, centralized control.
There was a very interesting. China is a long story. Okay, there's a very interesting story of studies of China by a fellow called Joseph Needham, who studied the technology, Chinese technology, like 13-volume book or something like that. And he's the first person to study China. And he detected one thing with the Chinese. He said they discovered all these technologies before they had the scholars. You know, the imperial palace where they had these scholars, mandarins? The minute they had the scholars corresponded with the time Europe discovered tinkering and trial and error and kept going with it. What we call techne versus episteme. You need both. You need techne and you need episteme. The problem is any country that wants to grow needs techne more than episteme. Techne is with the tinkering, you know, the cuisine, the recipes that are built in society, hands-on, that are transmitted through apprenticeship. The German miracle. What's that German miracle? Is it like university-based? 50% of German goes for apprenticeship. Switzerland. Still, it's a system where you have someone for 3 years as an apprentice in anything. Even just to change a light bulb, they have apprenticeship for that. You see, Italy, all these workshops, all these countries. So this is where we're going to go and critique university education. You need to train people young with the good high schools, but do not push people into university education. I went back to university education to get a doctorate after a career in trading. It was so much easier. You see, it was easier. I knew exactly what I wanted. I knew precisely what I wanted, okay? And although it was mathematical, it was, you know, it was still better for me that way than go study and then go find myself unemployed or driving an Uber with a PhD in sociology, okay? You want the exact reverse. Because not only that, but PhD in sociology not only is what we call disguised unemployment, driving an Uber, but guess what? He's not going to be the best driver, you see? So this is where growth comes from, a culture of tinkering. So it's not just my idea. About 15 or 20 researchers are involved in that, okay? And I have a slide here to show you that basically, the first slide here on the left is because you have a free option from reality. If I, you know, try to discover something via knowledge versus if I try to discover something by tinkering, because you have the optionality, you do so much better by tinkering. You can do computer simulation. And of course, we have professions that are driven by tinkering today, like computer science. And look how well your IT is doing. It's not doing well because of universities. Steve Jobs, okay, didn't go to university, didn't finish university. Mark Zuckerberg didn't finish university. The guy from Microsoft, you know, the guy with glasses, the same thing. And so, and the other guy called Larry or whatever. So a lot of these guys, or those who went to university didn't finish and stuff. So it is not. So what happened is that the problem is we have an illusion that professors want you to believe that. So, and I went through the history of architecture, for example. A lot of these heuristics were present since the Romans in great architectural, you know, format, without university knowledge. The minute they started training architects, teaching them geometry, which really didn't happen till late. They had built cathedrals without geometry. They had their own tricks, okay? The minute they learned geometry, then they gave us the ugliest architecture, from the Soviets I mean, you can see everything that was built by after geometry and what was before use of geometry. We've known about Euclid for 2,300 years. Nobody cared about it. The Romans found it shameful to study geometry. They said it's for the Greeks, for those who want to, you know, just sit down and talk. We build things, and look at stuff built with technique. I visited in France a bridge built by the Roman 2,000 years ago, Le Pont du Gard. I bet you nobody today can build a bridge of that sophistication. It's still standing. Show me a bridge in New York that we don't have to replace every 35, 40 years.
What do you think about the Indian cultural bias against this whole thing, techne? Because, you know, according to the 4 classes, the Varna system, we put the Brahmins on top and the Shudras at the bottom. The people who tinker are the Shudras, and the people who are professors and teachers and pandits are the Brahmins. What do you think about that?
Okay, so when I studied societies to look at, you remember in the beginning I said we're the first society that doesn't have its risk taker at the top? Actually, I was lying, right? There are 2 societies that didn't have its risk takers at the top. The first one was the France before the revolution. They granted something called noblesse de robe. Because to be a nobleman, you had to be a fighter and protect people. And still in the UK, in the Falklands War, they had Prince Andrew take more risk. They forced him to take more risk than other people. Say, you're a lord, you got to take more risk. That was the pact. People accepted lower class system, provided the fellow took more risk, okay? So the first exception is right before the French Revolution, they had been granting something called noblesse de robe, which means that nobility for magistrates, people who didn't get involved in war, that before revolution, and that people start writing. They said, he's not better than me, okay, because he doesn't take more risk. And the second exception is India. I could not find any other one where people didn't have the highest rank. Now, for the Arabs, there's something very interesting. For the Arabs, okay, I'm Christian Lebanese, so it's like I know, and I'm not, proposing Sharia, but when I studied Sharia, I noticed for the Arabs, it is shameful to make money without taking risk. Not only, and the highest rank was to the merchant. The highest status, and the Silk Road, they open the Silk Road, the merchants, they feed you, they take risk for you. So not only it's a warrior that was respected, but it's also the economic risk taker, to the point that it's still today, Sharia bans you from making money without taking risk. You see? You cannot be rich without taking a risk. And people detect it. In Switzerland, they wanted to rebel against the CEO, who really doesn't take risk. The CEO making a lot more money than employees. Never against entrepreneurs, because they knew that entrepreneur takes risks, deserves to make as much as she or he wants to make. The CEO, no. They're just rising in the corporation. So maybe we should cap their earning. And they had a referendum that failed, but nevertheless, they had a referendum. So comes to India. I'm not an expert on India, right? It's my 9th visit. I know I'm much more now knowledgeable about food and stuff like that about India, but there's one thing I want to tell you, okay? If you want to grow, forget about these bureaucratic measures. Don't go ask the government to make you grow. Ask people to make risk, to take risk. Make it respectable to take risk. Make it a badge of honor to fail. Like in Silicon Valley, we have the highest bankruptcy rate in the world, in America. It's and people fail 7 times. Hey, I failed 7 times. You, twice? You're a newcomer. Okay, and the second highest bankruptcy rate we have in States is in the restaurant business. And so far, I've never seen a restaurant crisis. Okay, in America, you have all kinds of crises. Right, but not a banking crisis, but not a restaurant crisis. Thanks.
I think there's a time button given there, Meher. But I want to sort of ask you that one question that we spoke about that is of very, very great importance inside India. It's a special subject called reservation. Government jobs and seats in government colleges and higher education, we have a system of reservation by castes or social classes, and almost 50% of a lot of these are reserved by quota. What do you think about that? Because how does that fit in?
Part of Antifragile, this is part of Antifragile, this discussion. And part of that, in Antifragile, I discussed the notion of overcompensation by showing, for example, that countries that got rich, Singapore, whenever you look at countries in a group, in a certain cultural group, okay, you want to find the richest one, find the one that has no resources, okay? Like Dubai is doing, much better than Saudi Arabia, all right? And I'm sure, nobody goes to Saudi Arabia for pleasure, but Dubai is the only place that doesn't have oil, right? So of all that cluster. Singapore, okay, you look at the Chinese-speaking world, Singapore has no resources. Switzerland has no resources. And I went back to the Phoenicians, absence of overcompensation. So I will not talk about India because of my lack of qualification and also political understanding, but I'll talk about the United States, which is a similar thing, where we have protected minorities. If you have a minority status in America, you have to be hired. The worst thing that can happen to you is to be classified as a minority. Why? Because true, you're going to get a job, but guess what? Again, it's a story of showing the surgeon. Maybe not in surgery, because in surgery doesn't have these protection. But when you see a minority, if you know it's easier for her or him to get that job because she or he is a minority, you're never going to patronize that person. So the worst thing you could do is protect people because it's a curse and, from perception. And the second point is it prevents overcompensation. They got a way to help. But the last thing you need is to give a handicap in that game, to give people that handicap. You got to find some other ways, you see. And in America, if you look at people that thrived, they could have been classified as minorities, but they chose not to or didn't want to. And you do very well. This is overcompensation. It's the same mechanism by which, if you want to remember my lecture, if I force you to make an effort to understand me, guess what? You remember better the lecture. So because of overcompensation. Just like when I work in a cafe, I concentrate better because of background noise, overcompensation. So that works in many fields. That's the topic of Antifragile. But I'm glad you asked me about that subject because you're really harming people by giving them that kind of cosmetic status. So it got to be done. Something got to be done, definitely. But there got to be other routes.
I think, Meher, if I can sort of throw the floor open for a couple of questions. Yeah? Okay. There's somebody there.
Hi, Nassim. What are your views on political Islam as a risk for the economy, global economy?
Political?
Islam.
I think, so I'm going to say something because I don't go to Saudi Arabia and I traveled here without going via Dubai, not without a reason, I discovered one very interesting thing. Tripoli in Lebanon used to drink because it was Sufi, okay? And then suddenly it became very religious. I don't know if you've seen what happened in Lebanon with the riots. Our riots are different from the Iranian riots because our riots are more like a nightclub dancing, all right? Where people they do yoga in the morning and stuff. So Tripoli is a bastion of Salafis in Lebanon. They had disc jockeys and people dancing. So, you're entitled to ask what has happened. They said, we're bone dry. Not a penny came from Saudi Arabia over the past 18 months. All it took is 18 months to transform people from Salafis into rock music and separation of church and state. They're still committed. All it took is 18 months in Tripoli. Can you believe it? So basically, I wrote a lot about it. It was minority rule. I believe that maybe 1% of that population is has this bent, so it doesn't take much. Sort of like when you ask me about growth, it doesn't take much to have growth. All you have to do is encourage risk-taking. Forget about the rest. Or economist is going to give you models and all that nonsense, and to employ economists, which is good probably for employment, but it's always small tricks. And here the very simple trick was MBS came and told the Wahhabis, okay, you guys, you know what? You got nothing. Stopped. So I think it makes me a lot more positive about the future of the region. The fellow was very excited. He's from Tripoli. And he says, look at this dancing. 18 months.
You have emphasized a lot on risk-taking. So my daughter has just entered into college. How do I inculcate risk-taking in a young girl? She's 18.
Okay, so what I said in Antifragile, as a reaction, basically to answer a question like that one, is what should I do with my life? When a lot of people who are 18, sometimes they want to help the world. They say, well, there's poverty in the world, my parents are rich, we're privileged, this, that, let me help the world. So they go into an NGO. And I tell them, listen, if you want to help yourself, you want to help the world, you want to help your parents, you want to help, do one thing, start a business. We're tired of people who are shooting for a salary. Start a business, particularly if your parents are rich and you can fail. You must start a business. Right? So that's what I would say. Sorry? Well, I mean, I discovered one thing as a shock because I went to America about 40 years ago, and I discovered children was one thing about, I came from, of course, patrician family in Lebanon, and if I'm 7 or 8 years old, having a lemonade stand, my grandmother would have, heart attack, seeing me, all right? They said, your status is selling lemonade by the street, okay? You go to America, and it's sort of rite of passage, or kids learn at age 8 to sell lemonade, to have a lemonade stand. But then again, that's America. That's why the Anglo-Saxon world overcame that inhibition with the Industrial Revolution. So this is, all you need to do is teach people to start a business, or at age 8, lemonade stand. I mean, they end up with $2, $3 gain, and they buy themselves whatever they want. All right? So I was shocked, again, to see how prevalent it was in America, and it was not, I grew up in Lebanon, up till 17, 18, and to me, doing that was, I mean, I would be ashamed if my grandmother saw me, you see? So you have to change the culture.
Hi, I'm Karnveer. I used to work in London as an investment banker as well. Then came to India. Now I run a media and a PR company. I wanted to know that what is the impact of all that you've spoken? What is the impact of corruption, the concept of corruption in all this? Because when I speak to my people, I mean, I'm the head of alumni for the London School of Economics, and I speak to people from all over the world. They can't understand the concept of corruption and why it's so extent to the
Okay,
extent
so
in India.
There's one thing about corruption that's quite interesting. It's very interesting because America has corruption, all right? Effectively, you're a Geithner, you save the bankers, but you got the job later. $5 million a year from the banking system. So America has this revolving door where if you're nice to the industry. So there's two kinds of corruption. There is the corruption, really, there's I mean, it's never good, but there's a neutral corruption. And there is the Paulo Helu in Brazil, okay? Paulo Maluf, sorry, his name in Brazil, was a big corrupt politician, and whose slogan was, okay, I steal, but I deliver, okay? And then you have the second part, which is worse than corruption, is patronage, and it's rent-seeking. It's a bureaucrat who, without stealing much, slow you down, simply because they want the privilege. They have that stamp. You got to go through that stamp. I think the latter is even more dangerous. Typically, they come together, you see? Typically, the bad part isn't as much the corruption part as much as it is the patronage, and the people are You create a job for someone who will slow you down, okay? So the process becomes bureaucratic, and plus there's another thing. The one more, we have 2 more minutes to grant me? Okay. People have the illusion in the Western world or everywhere that it's typically people in power who are the corrupt ones. In fact, it's not so. If you want to, the problem is what we call opaque administrations. A minister in the UK called me up having red skin in the game. He said, there's something you're missing. I said, what? He said, I'm a minister. I have no control of my ministry. Why are you blaming me, putting my skin in the game? He said, you have employees who've been there for 30 years. They can maneuver, passive resistance, they can maneuver, they can do things, and they know what's going on. So this is the more dangerous thing, is that opaque administration that can slow you down because there is a divergence of interest between a bureaucrat, okay, and the general public. And to remove that is not easy by naming a new minister. You have to do something structural. For example, Donald Trump figured out something to break that administrative hold, is move the Department of Agriculture to Iowa, which makes sense, no? Break it up, move it to Iowa. They didn't understand what was going on, say, okay, we'll move them to Iowa, all right? So you break it up. So this is what, we have a Kafkaian administration in the UK that was Brexit, with all these procedures, they were slowing down, unelected. This is what people are rebelling against. So corruption is bad, but there's even worse than corruption, which is that administrative divergence of interest between someone in administration and the function of the administration.
Good evening. My name is
questions?
Navdeep. Just while a person is undergoing the failures,
Sorry?
yeah, at a
Okay.
time when a person is undergoing some failures, how should his nears and dear ones behave as we feel attached to him? I mean, what can we do for him?
Okay, to encourage people to take risk, you have to really, number one, make it non-shameful. Forget the money to fail, okay? And also you have to make that person employable, okay? So you have a buffer. People take risk early on. Had we waited, had Bill Gates waited, to graduate from Harvard, okay, he probably would have been a corporate lawyer, okay? Bill Gates, and wouldn't have had Microsoft. So you realize the thing. So you have to encourage people to take these positions early on in life, and at the same time give them a net, some kind of safety net, both with future employment and with some kind of compensation if they fail. And that's what the state can do. Like, for example, some type of very generous employment benefit to those who fail.
Thank you.
I don't know about it. I know possession is not thanks of the law, and my flight is tomorrow night. Sorry? No.
Yeah, you can. Any more questions from the audience? Okay, I have a question for you actually.
okay.
I wanted to understand what is it that you make of this growing protectionism that the world seems to be getting into. I don't know what's going to happen between the trade war, so to speak, between US and China. The jury is still out on that. There's still time to go. But there really seems to be more sort of inclusion, if I can call it that, economy-wise. Okay. Where do you think this situation is going to lead us all into?
Okay, so there is something, what Trump was writing on is the following, okay? That nobody is against, free trade. But it looks like the idea, the benefit from these kind of concentration of, there's concentration and inequality coming from free trade. Large corporations have their shills, and they have their economists spinning the story that completely unfettered trade is okay. And maybe they say, maybe it's not 100% free, it could be maybe 95% free. Because think about it. Let's say that you're a shoemaker in Pittsburgh, and your identity is vested into that shoemaking. You lose your job as a shoemaker. You lost your identity. So of course you're going to vote for some kind of protectionism, not much, okay, to get that kind of balance. Plus people don't, this I wrote about in The Black Swan, by saying that 100 years ago, because we did not have that communications, it was impossible to have a Harry Potter. So every writer in her or his country would have an audience. Today, 100 writers make 60% of the income from writing worldwide, you see? So that globalization causes more concentration. And people detect it. So maybe we should slow down, maybe 95% of what we have, not 100%, to just prevent this cross-border concentration. Because it's big companies that have been benefiting from it. Like Google, like the big publishing houses, like the, so it's not just US, China, okay? So.
That's a great perspective. Any more, we have time for just one final question, the gentleman
and then I'll
at the
conclude
back.
with a sentence, with a parting wisdom.
At the back, if you can just stand up, a mic will get to you. Ravi, can we have the mic at the back?
I just need to get the philosophical part right.
I can't hear.
I want to get the philosophical part right. For a person who is trying to, or fails, how do we know whether he has given the full in on it and failed, or he is basically just given up trying and, tried, but not really tried it full-heartedly?
Sorry, I couldn't hear well because of
Even I didn't get, could you repeat your question, please?
Yeah, I'm saying, we are saying encourage failures. So I said, suppose a person whom you're wanting to give this chance to fail says, I tried and failed, but did not really put completely inside, passionately tried to do something and failed when we gave them the chance, versus a person who's really fully tried it. How do you differentiate?
Okay, so again, it's not up to society to decide, all right, if someone succeeded or not, just like the restaurant business, okay? Forget about these innovation awards and stuff like that. It's your P&L. Or we're saying that society should be generous towards people who failed, okay? Because anyway, failure is a stigma. And one more thing to say before I close is that most of the problems we have in the Western world, and I talk as a risk manager now, come from one thing, not understanding that if you're going to fail eventually, you must fail early, not late. Thank you for listening to me.